In the South, we don't question things much. Living in South Carolina has its own pros and cons that don't involve the supernatural or abnormal stuff that occurs. But when it does, none of us tend to play with the concept of speaking on it. Everyone just moves along and pretends that it never happened for fear of being the next target of whatever the hell dwells in the woods at night. We just don't question things. I guess now I'm playing with my own fate by even choosing to acknowledge it, although I'd rather do it now than be forced to keep my mouth shut about it. I'll give you a little background about myself. I'm Indigenous and Black. My tribe is Lumbee, and although we aren't federally recognized by the government, we sure as hell exist in numbers out here. Growing up was a struggle for me, as well as my family, seeing as the South ain't really an ideal place to live unless you have the money for it, but we were all grateful for whatever came our way. My mama always told me that little girls born here were meant to stay here, and I guess she was right because I'm still around. I guess this place has a way of charming you. I couldn't really imagine moving into the city. Nevertheless, if you plan on moving here, then I'd suggest being prepared for a crap fest of superstitions to be thrown in your direction. I guess this'll either help or hinder you. The first rule I can recall was told to me by my older brother. We were sitting on the back porch just watching the sunset when he ran back inside and returned with a plate of greens and sat it down on the edge of the step, positioning it carefully before instructing me to go inside. I didn't really question it, seeing as my brother wasn't a bossy person, and I wasn't really a brat either. However, my curiosity only grew as he bolted the door behind us. Once we had stepped through the entrance, he started muttering something about lousy Sundays and no good bleepers. We both clearly knew that he was too young to be saying such things, but it was never without reason that I couldn't help but ask what he meant. With a solemn face, my brother leaned down in front of me and shook his head before reaching out a large hand to pat mine. Sis, don't question things much. You's too curious and it's gonna backfire on you, but I'll let you in on a little secret. Leaning in, he whispered something that was enough to keep me awake for the following nights. If we don't feed it, it's gonna find its own food, and when it does, that won't be pretty. Collard greens is enough to keep it at bay, and yous would do best to remember that because eventually I'm gonna make you do it instead. I was around 9 when the tradition was passed down to me, and I've only ever missed one night in my lifetime. My brother went missing a week later. The next rule that was given to me came from the mouth of my neighbor as we were walking home. On the days where my mama worked overtime, the old woman next door would walk me home once I got off the bus. I don't remember her name, seeing as it was so long ago, but I do know that she always carried a pink sweater with her, and I recall that being so peculiar because it was 6 sizes smaller than her person, like what a child might wear. Upon asking her about it, she smiled gently at me as an adult would with a naive child. It's always good to have an item on your person from someone you've lost down here. Why? I asked, my hand gripping hers tightly. At this, she frowned momentarily. Honey, don't question things such as that. Lord knows why, but my mama always told me that it makes it so you know that the person calling your name at night ain't the one that died 2 days ago. Looking back on it, after the disappearance of my brother, I carried around a watch of his quite a lot. Now, when I hear him whispering my name at night, I know not to respond. The last story I'll tell you for now is one that I've experienced myself. A friend and I were heading home from the bar and were driving down the road we usually took, seeing as it was the fastest route, when we saw what looked to be a young man out on the road in front of us. I immediately stepped on the brakes, and my friend began to shout when I held up a hand, rolling down my window and managing to get out a shaky, "You okay?" The man, seemingly unhurt, ran over to my side and leaned down. Because of the fact that this road in particular had no streetlights, it was rather hard to make out what his face looked like, but for some unknown reason, I had a desire to know. I believe I'm fine. I must apologize as I've been standing here all day and no one has stopped for me. I was wondering if I could tag along with you two. My friend gave me a look of concern. However, I nodded, pointing to the back seat and hearing a relieved sigh. My friend's worried expression seemed to intensify when he settled up behind her. I could see him if I glanced into the mirror that hung overhead, but for some reason I felt compelled not to look. I began driving. While my friend shifted in her seat, I once again did not look back, even when there was a sudden flash of lightning and I was able to see horns rather than hair. Eventually, we reached a fork in the road and the man informed us to stop, thanking us for our time and removing himself. I drove home without bringing up the odd encounter to my friend, even when I noticed her uneasy look. Turns out, there's been a rather large increase in accidents on that particular road. Nowadays, when he makes himself comfortable in my car and I'm alone, he chooses to sit in the front seat. The one time I chose to get too curious, I ended up with a broken leg from the car overturning. The cops ruled it a drunk driving incident despite me not having any alcohol in my system. I guess in the South, you really don't question things. Thanks for watching, and before you go, here's a special shout out to my patrons who donated $20 or more. Jocelyn Cunningham, Fantasy Rider Cosplay, Dark Nito Taki, Avrok Levgry, Jesse, and Simon Laverdier Delisle. Thanks so much, you guys. If you're interested in becoming a patron and helping me to keep YouTube creepy, please feel free to check out the link in the card.